Have you ever felt so completely alone that even in a room built for hope, all you could feel was emptiness? The kind of solitude that weighs on your shoulders like invisible hands, pressing you down until your knees meet the cold floor in surrender. This is not just a story about a woman who lost everything, or about a man who had everything, but found himself kneeling in the same sacred darkness. This is about what happens when two broken souls find each other in the shadows, and one whispers words that change everything. Don't let the powerful make you believe your kindness is weakness. Sometimes, what we lose isn't the end of our story. It's just the universe clearing space for a new beginning, one where kindness and courage light the way forward. Nashville, Tennessee, a city of dreamers and heartbreakers, where neon lights advertise hopes as easily as they sell whiskey. Away from Broadway's noise, St. Mary's Chapel stood silent, its stained glass windows filtering moonlight across empty pews. For Maggie Cole, this church had become the only place she could breathe. At 29, she'd built her life around two pillars: the children she taught at Sunshine Valley Preschool and the man she was supposed to marry next spring. Both vanished in 3 days. "I did the right thing," she whispered, her voice echoing. "I know I did." But doing the right thing had cost her everything. 1 week earlier, Maggie had noticed bruises on 4-year-old Emma's arms. Small, fingerprint-shaped marks hidden beneath long sleeves, despite the summer heat. Emma's father, James Whitman, was Nashville's most celebrated defense attorney and Sunshine Valley's biggest donor. When Maggie reported her suspicions, the school director, Victoria Reynolds, responded immediately. "You understand who you're accusing?" Victoria asked, manicured nails tapping her desk. "Whitman sits on every board that matters. One word from him and our funding disappears." "And one word from us might save his daughter," Maggie countered. The next day, Maggie filed a report with Child Protective Services. The day after, she received a termination letter citing poor professional judgment and creating unnecessary conflict with parent stakeholders. That night, when she told her fiancé Michael, he didn't comfort her. He paced their apartment, running his hands through his hair. "Maggie, do you have any idea what you've done?" Michael worked at Whitman's firm. "James is furious. He's talking about suing you personally." "Let him," Maggie said, though her voice trembled. "The truth is on our side." Michael looked at her with something between pity and fear. "There's no hour in this, Maggie. I can't risk my career." He left that night, the engagement ring sitting coldly on their kitchen counter. So here she was, alone in St. Mary's, at 10:47 p.m. with no job, no fiancé, and a lawsuit looming. The tears came silently as she pressed her forehead against clasped hands. She didn't hear the door open or the soft footsteps. Only when someone knelt beside her did Maggie look up, startled to find a stranger in a rumpled suit. "I'm sorry," he said gently. "I didn't mean to disturb you. I recognize that kind of crying." Maggie wiped her tears. "It's fine, I should go." "Please don't," he said. Then, after hesitating, "Don't let the powerful make you believe your kindness is weakness." Those words froze her. She turned to really look at him, late 30s perhaps, with kind eyes that carried their own history of pain. "How did you—" "I don't know your story," he admitted, "but I know what it looks like when someone's been punished for doing something right." In the silence that followed, neither knew they were beginning a journey that would change both their lives. Neither knew that Oliver Grant, CEO of a growing tech company, had just met the woman who would teach him the true meaning of wealth. And neither knew that Victoria Reynolds was at that moment crafting a narrative to destroy them both. Maggie didn't tell Oliver her name that night in the church, nor did he offer his. Some connections don't need introductions. They're formed in the spaces between words, in shared silence and understanding. It was as if they both instinctively knew that names would bring reality crashing back in. And for those few sacred minutes, reality was precisely what they were both escaping. The days following their encounter were a blur for Maggie. Her phone rang constantly with calls from former colleagues, some genuinely concerned, others hungry for gossip. Her email inbox filled with rejections from schools where she'd applied. At night, she'd stare at the empty side of her bed, wondering how her life had imploded so completely in the space of a week. On the third morning, desperate for a change of scenery, Maggie gathered her laptop and resume files and headed to Brood Awakening, a small coffee shop tucked between a used bookstore and a vintage record shop. The place was quiet, with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls, far from the polished chains that dotted Nashville's more affluent neighborhoods. For 3 hours, she applied to jobs well below her qualifications, retail positions, administrative roles, anything to keep the lights on while the lawsuit drained her savings. Each submission felt like another step down a ladder she'd spent years climbing. She was so absorbed in her task that she didn't notice someone approaching until a ceramic mug appeared on the table beside her laptop. "Lavender tea," said a familiar voice. "I heard it helps with stress." Maggie looked up, momentarily disoriented, to find the man from the church standing beside her table. He was dressed more casually today, jeans and a simple button-down shirt, but his eyes held the same quiet intensity she remembered. "I'm Oliver, by the way," he said, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. "May I?" "Maggie," she replied, cautious but not unwelcoming. She closed her laptop partially, covering the rejection email she'd just received. "Are you stalking me?" His laugh was unexpected, warm and genuine, transforming his serious face into something almost boyish. "No, I promise, I come. Here every morning before heading to the office. The stalking is purely coincidental." He tilted his head slightly. "Though I'll admit I recognized you the moment I walked in." There was something about Oliver that put Maggie at ease. Perhaps it was the lack of judgment in his eyes, or the way he seemed perfectly comfortable sitting in silence when she didn't feel like talking. He never asked about the night in the church, and she didn't volunteer the information. Instead, they spoke of other things, books they'd read, places they'd visited, the way Nashville changed with the seasons. His knowledge of literature surprised her. He spoke about Steinbeck and Morrison with the same easy familiarity as he discussed the city's changing skyline. "Do you live nearby?" she asked, realizing she knew nothing concrete about him. "Not far," he replied vaguely. "I have an apartment downtown, nothing special, but the view makes up for it." What Maggie didn't know was that Oliver's apartment occupied the entire top floor of the Archer, Nashville's most exclusive residential tower. And she certainly didn't know that Oliver had recognized her name the moment she'd introduced herself. Victoria Reynolds moved in the same social circles as many of Nashville's business leaders, and she'd been vocal at a recent charity gala about the troublemaking teacher who'd tried to smear a respected attorney's reputation. Oliver had listened to Victoria's version with skepticism. He'd built his technology empire on his ability to see beneath surfaces, to question established narratives. And something about Victoria's story didn't add up. The practiced outrage, the careful omission of details about the child involved. Their coffee shop meetings became a routine, a bright spot in Maggie's increasingly difficult weeks. Oliver began arriving with newspaper clippings of teaching positions in neighboring counties, contacts at private schools, anything that might help her rebuild. His kindness was a counterbalance to the growing weight of her circumstances. The promised lawsuit from James Whitman had materialized, a thick envelope delivered by courier demanding damages for defamation of character and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The astronomical figure at the bottom of the page had made Maggie physically ill, more money than she could earn in 20 years of teaching. Her savings were dwindling rapidly to cover attorney consultations and the rent on an apartment she could no longer afford, and no school in the area would touch her resume, not with Whitman's influence casting such a long shadow. "You seem especially worried today," Oliver observed one morning, 3 weeks after they'd first met at the coffee shop. The dark circles under Maggie's eyes told of another sleepless night. "Just the usual," she replied, attempting a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Trying to figure out how to make rent next month while paying a lawyer to tell me how hopeless my case is." Oliver was quiet for a moment, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. Then he reached into his messenger bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "You should apply here," he said, sliding the printout across the table. It was a job listing for a children's advocate at a local non-profit called Second Chances. Maggie scanned the description. a position working with children who had experienced trauma, using art and play therapy to help them process their experiences. The salary was surprisingly generous for non-profit work. "They work with children who've experienced trauma," Oliver explained. "Your background would be perfect. The director is an old friend. I could put in a word if you'd like." What Oliver didn't mention was that Second Chances operated primarily through grants from the Grant Foundation, his personal charity. Nor did he mention that the old friend had been his college roommate, now paid an exceptional salary to run the foundation, according to Oliver's vision of supporting society's most vulnerable. When Maggie was called for an interview the next day, she was too relieved to question the timing. The director, a warm woman named Diana, spoke passionately about their mission and seemed genuinely impressed by Maggie's experience and commitment. And when she was offered the position hours after her interview, she attributed it to divine intervention rather than Oliver's behind-the-scenes influence. "I got the job," she told Oliver the following morning, her face alight with a joy he hadn't seen before. "I start on Monday." Oliver's smile reflected her own. "That's wonderful news. They're lucky to have you." "Thank you," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand briefly. "For everything. For the tip about the job, for listening to me ramble for weeks, for—" She hesitated. "For seeing me when I felt invisible." Something flickered. In Oliver's eyes, a shadow of guilt quickly replaced by genuine warmth. "That's what friends are for," he said, though the word friends felt inadequate for whatever was growing between them. For the first time in weeks, Maggie felt hope returning. The work at Second Chances was challenging but fulfilling, using art therapy to help children process their experiences and rebuild trust. Each small breakthrough, each tiny smile from a child who had forgotten how, felt like redemption for the career she'd sacrificed. And her evenings with Oliver, whether walking through Centennial Park as the fireflies emerged or sharing takeout on her apartment balcony, had begun to heal something she hadn't realized was broken long before Michael left. Oliver listened in a way Michael never had, not waiting for his turn to speak, but truly absorbing her words, valuing her thoughts. "You know," she told him one evening as they watched the sunset from Riverside Park, "when Michael left, I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. Now I'm starting to think I never had it to begin with." Oliver's hand found hers in the gathering dusk. "Sometimes we have to lose the life we thought we wanted to find the one we're meant to have." Maggie leaned slightly against his shoulder, comfortable in the growing intimacy between them. "When did you get so wise?" "Experience," he said. "Simply the hard kind." He didn't elaborate and Maggie didn't press. That was their unspoken agreement, no digging into painful pasts, just building something new from the present moment forward. But as Maggie's world was expanding, finding new dimensions of purpose and connection, Victoria Reynolds was watching, seething. The Whitman lawsuit against Maggie had stalled when Child Protective Services found evidence supporting Maggie's claims. Unexplained bruises, documented by the family pediatrician, concerning behavioral changes noted by other teachers. Worse, Victoria's preschool was now under investigation for failing to report suspected abuse, with potential criminal charges looming for Victoria herself as the director. She needed someone to blame, someone to divert attention from her own failings. And when she spotted Maggie and Oliver sharing lunch at a riverside restaurant, their hands occasionally touching across the table, Victoria saw her opportunity. Oliver Grant was a figure of fascination in Nashville's business community, the self-made tech genius who had transformed a startup coding project in his college dorm into Grant Technologies, now worth billions. He rarely gave interviews, declined most society invitations, and was notoriously private about his personal life. But Victoria recognized him instantly. She had unsuccessfully tried to secure a donation from him for Sunshine Valley's new building fund just months earlier. Victoria watched them for nearly an hour, discreetly taking photos with her phone. From a distance, the way Oliver leaned forward when Maggie spoke, the genuine laugh he shared at something she said, the tenderness when he brushed a strand of hair from her face, it all spoke of something far deeper than casual friendship. Victoria's mind raced with possibilities. She still had connections at the Nashville Insider, a local gossip blog run by a former parent from her preschool. With the right spin, this could be exactly the distraction she needed. The next morning, a post appeared on the blog, exclusive. Disgraced teacher lands on her feet, in billionaire's arms. Sources close to the situation say Maggie Cole, recently fired from Sunshine Valley Preschool for making false accusations against prominent attorney James Whitman, has found a lucrative backup plan. The former preschool teacher has been spotted multiple times with reclusive tech billionaire Oliver Grant, CEO of Grant Technologies, and one of Nashville's most eligible bachelors. Coincidentally, Cole just landed a position at a children's charity with direct ties to Grant's foundation. We have to ask, just how far would someone go to secure a billionaire safety net? And what does this relationship reveal about the motivations behind Cole's accusations against one of Nashville's most respected citizens? Swipe for exclusive photos of the cozy couple around town. The post went viral within hours. Maggie's phone began lighting up with notifications, former colleagues sharing the link with wide-eyed emojis, Michael asking if it was true, even parents from her former school sending messages ranging from curiosity to disgust. Maggie was in the middle of an art therapy session with a 6-year-old girl when her phone began buzzing incessantly. It wasn't until her lunch break that she checked it, her stomach dropping as she scrolled through the barrage of messages and finally clicked on the link everyone was sharing. The photos were innocent enough, her and Oliver at lunch, walking through the park, sitting at their regular coffee shop table. But the insinuations in the text painted everything in a sordid light. Worse, the casual mention of Oliver's wealth and status hit her like a physical blow. Billionaire? CEO? This couldn't be her Oliver, the thoughtful man in simple clothes who listened to her problems over coffee, who never mentioned his work beyond vague references to the office. When her phone rang with Oliver's number, she answered immediately, her voice tight with confusion. "Have you seen it?" he asked without preamble, his tone carrying a controlled anger she'd never heard before. "The blog post?" "Yes. Oliver. What are they talking about?" "Billionaire." The silence that followed confirmed what the gossip blog had revealed. Oliver Grant wasn't just some kind businessman who'd shown her kindness. He was Oliver Grant, CEO of Grant Technologies, worth an estimated $7 billion. "I should have told you," Oliver said quietly. It was nice having someone see me as just a person for once, not my bank account or my company." The realization crashed over Maggie in waves. The job at Second Chances that materialized so easily, the apartment with a view, his careful vagueness about his work. All the pieces rearranged themselves in her mind, forming a picture so different from what she'd believed. So, everything, our friendship, the job, it was all just what, charity? The word tasted bitter in her mouth. "Maggie, no, that's not—" "I have to go," she cut him off. "I can't do this right now." Without waiting for his response, she ended the call, her hand shaking so badly she nearly dropped the phone. For the rest of the day, Maggie moved through her responsibilities at Second Chances in a fog of hurt and confusion. Had Oliver been laughing at her all along, this impossibly wealthy man watching her struggle over rent payments while he pulled strings from the shadows? Was their growing closeness genuine, or just an amusing diversion for a man who could buy and sell her whole existence without noticing the expense? The children she worked with sensed her distraction. "You're sad today," observed Emma, a perceptive 7-year-old who reminded Maggie painfully of her former student. "Just a little tired," Maggie replied, forcing a smile as they worked on their clay sculptures. Emma studied her with ancient eyes in a young face. "My daddy says sometimes people pretend to be nice, but they're actually bad. But sometimes people pretend to be bad, but they're actually nice. It's confusing." From the mouths of babes, Maggie thought, the simple wisdom striking her heart. Which was Oliver, really? The genuine friend who'd supported her through her darkest days, or the deceptive billionaire playing some incomprehensible game? Across town, Victoria Reynolds smiled as she watched her plan unfold. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing. Journalists seeking comment, parents suddenly reconsidering her version of events, board members suggesting that perhaps they'd been too hasty. In considering disciplinary action, the scandal was already overtaking the investigation into her school's handling of the abuse report. Better yet, she'd finally found a way to hurt the self-righteous Maggie Cole. "I just thought people deserved to know the truth," Victoria told a local TV reporter who called for comment. If Ms. Cole's judgment was compromised by her personal relationship with such a powerful man, it raises serious questions about her allegations. But Victoria had miscalculated in one crucial way. She'd assumed Oliver Grant was like other powerful men she'd known, concerned primarily with public perception and eager to distance himself from controversy. Men who would sacrifice a new relationship in a heartbeat to protect their carefully cultivated image. She didn't know about the night 10 years earlier when a younger Oliver had knelt in that same church, destroyed by his ex-wife's betrayal, and the loss of his first company. She didn't know about Pastor John finding him there, offering the same words Oliver had given to Maggie. She didn't know how those words had become a cornerstone of Oliver's rebuilt life, a reminder that true strength lay in kindness, not power. And Victoria certainly didn't know what Oliver would do next. That evening, as Maggie sat in her apartment, ignoring the persistent ringing of her phone and the growing pile of notifications, there was a knock at her door. She approached cautiously, half expecting to find reporters or worse, Oliver himself. It wasn't Oliver standing there, but Pastor John, his kind face creased with concern. "May I come in?" he asked. "There's a story you need to hear." Pastor John sat at Maggie's kitchen table, weathered hands wrapped around tea she'd made automatically, hospitality being a habit chaos couldn't erase. 10 years ago, he began, a young man came into St. Mary's around midnight. His wife had just left him for his business partner, taking not only his heart but half his company. Maggie listened as Pastor John described finding Oliver Grant sobbing, not the confident billionaire the world knew, but a broken man who'd lost everything. "I told him something my mentor once told me," Pastor John continued. "Don't let the powerful make you believe your kindness is weakness." Those same words Oliver shared with you. The pastor explained how Oliver had rebuilt, creating a company centered on integrity and second chances, how he'd used his wealth to fund organizations protecting the vulnerable, including Second Chances, which employed numerous abuse survivors. "He didn't get you that job as charity," Pastor John said gently. "He recognized in you the same courage he had to find, the willingness to stand for what's right, even when it costs everything." As dusk deepened, Maggie felt the pieces shifting, forming a new picture of the man she'd come to care for. "Why didn't he tell me himself?" she asked. "Pride, perhaps, or fear?" Pastor John smiled. "Even billionaires are human. He's afraid of losing your friendship, one relationship not colored by his wealth." After Pastor John left, Maggie sat weighing her options. Her phone buzzed with another message, another stranger passing judgment. Something shifted inside. She'd stood up for Emma because it was right. Could she do any less now, for herself, for Oliver? The next morning, Maggie walked into Grant Technologies without an appointment. Security moved to intercept her, but a voice called, "It's okay. Let her through." Oliver stood there, looking more vulnerable in his expensive suit than in their coffee shop meetings. "I should have told you," he said simply. "Yes, but I understand why you didn't." They talked for hours in his office. Oliver explained how he'd first heard about Maggie through Victoria's gossip and gone to church specifically hoping to find her, to offer help based on his experience with public humiliation. "But then I met you," he said, "and you weren't looking for a savior or checkbook. You were heartbroken that the system failed a child. I respected that more than I can say." As they talked, Oliver's assistant interrupted. Victoria had scheduled a press conference, planning to escalate her campaign against them both. "Let her," Maggie said, echoing her words from weeks earlier. But this time there was no tremor in her voice. Oliver studied her, then nodded. "Actually, I have a better idea." 3 hours later, Oliver Grant broke his reclusiveness by holding his own press conference. Cameras flashed as he approached the microphone, Maggie standing behind him. 10 years ago, Oliver began, I lost everything because I chose money over morals. I watched silently as my partner engaged in ethical violations because confronting him might damage our company's valuation. That silence cost me my integrity. He paused, cameras capturing every word. Last month, Maggie Cole lost everything because she chose morals over money. She reported suspected child abuse despite knowing it would cost her job and reputation. The difference is that Ms. Cole didn't hesitate to do the right thing. Oliver turned to face Maggie directly. You taught me what real courage looks like, and I'd like to return the favor by standing beside you now. Turning back to the press, Oliver announced that Grant Technologies was launching a new initiative, a training program for recognizing and reporting suspected abuse, named for Emma Whitman and funded with a $10 million investment. And Ms. Cole will be heading this initiative if she accepts. The story exploded across social media, but not as Victoria had planned. The narrative shifted overnight, from scandal to inspiration. James Whitman quietly dropped his lawsuit and agreed to family counseling. Victoria resigned amid growing pressure. 2 months later, Maggie stood nervously at Grant Technologies, preparing to lead her first training session. Oliver approached, offering a reassuring smile. Nervous? He asked. Terrified? She admitted. But the good kind, the kind that means something matter, Oliver nodded. Before you go in there, I wanted to ask you something. What's that? Would you have dinner with me tonight? Not as colleagues or friends, but something new. Maggie felt her heart skip. Are you asking me on a date, Mr. Grant? I believe I am, Ms. Cole. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn evening, Maggie returned to St. Mary's Chapel. This time she wasn't crying alone. This time she walked confidently down the center aisle, where Oliver waited with Pastor John. And when Oliver knelt before her, it wasn't to offer comfort to a stranger, but to ask a question of the woman he'd come to love, whose courage had changed not just her life, but the lives of countless children now protected by their programs. In the soft light filtering through stained glass, Oliver whispered new, words that changed everything again. Will you build this next chapter with me? As Maggie's yes echoed, Pastor John smiled. This space had witnessed many endings, but today it celebrated a beginning, built on the foundation that sometimes what we lose becomes the doorway to everything we were meant to find.